on those as well. And with that being said, let's all do a bit of a transition. So if you all are anything like me, some of these days can get jam-packed and crazy, and there's work and training and kids and family and life. Now is just the moment, right? You just take a second, take a pause, make sure you're somewhere comfortable, ideally somewhere where you have a little bit of space, a little bit of quiet, remove the distractions, put the phone on do not disturb if you can, settle in. And then when you're ready, take a few deep breaths, if not for this session, for your own just deloading from the day. So, and I'm going to take a couple as well. This is always a little bit of that uncomfortable part at the beginning, because we don't often like breathe together like this. But believe it or not, what we're doing right now was our first peak performance kind of ritual or practice. This idea of the transition and the idea of using your breath. I'm going to spend probably 5 minutes just talking about the importance of breath in our nervous system in a little bit, but just hopefully you took a breath or two there with me. I certainly needed it to get in the room today. Finally, I wanted to share a little bit of like what we're going to cover in the next hour or so. I want to talk, just share a little bit about myself. I'm always mindful that, whether you're watching this live or you're watching a recording, you may have no clue who I am. So I'll give you some of the details that are relevant for why I care so much about this session and this content. We're going to spend most of the time really diving into these like 3 strategies that all of us, every single person can use. I mean, both in sport, but also in other areas of life as well. We're going to talk a little bit about, what happens when it's all over, right? One of the things that we don't often talk about is like for all of us, the journeys that we're on, the athletics pursuits that we're, the goals that we're chasing, one day that's going to be all done. It might be, your competition this year. It might be the end of your career. What happens? Like that's a really critical transition point that we don't spend enough time talking and kind of addressing. And then I'm going to basically show a slide that has a 30-day program for anyone that's getting ready to go and do a big event, a competition. This essentially will be your playbook, or it can be. And this is something that I'm going to include in the email probably tomorrow. And then as always, I will stick around. And if there's any questions that you put in the chat or in the Q&A, we can just kind of open it up at that point. One piece of feedback that I'd love from everyone here is, do you see opportunities to have these sessions live? Because I absolutely love doing this in person. It's just not quite the same. The other kind of question to that is, eventually I want to start running these more in a workshop capacity where we're all on the screen together in smaller groups. So a couple of things to think about as we go through this. Would that be valuable if it was a little bit more interactive? Obviously, kind of making do with what we can on Zoom here. So like I mentioned earlier, right? Don't worry about digesting everything. 2 takeaways for you today. 1, as an athlete, a practical tool, something you can start doing tomorrow to help you perform better when you're out there and it counts. The second one is a human, because we are all humans and we all feel and experience things as we're going through life. And there's definitely a takeaway in here that you can kind of help just make yourself more resilient, give yourself a kind of an edge on how you learn and grow. Each of these are really important, right? This time is all about us finding a few new skills, a few new ways to think and see the world that help make us better, right? Like that's why I'm here. That's why I show up. And to transition, I want to give you a bit of my backstory, right? So, this journey of peak performance in my life started back when I was 9 years old. That was when I essentially was kind of given or had this dream, this vision in my head of going and being the best basketball player in the country, right? In Canada, and ideally one of the best in the world. And, I'm so grateful. One of the things we won't talk about today is the value of having your support group, right? Your tribe, your crew. And for me, when I was 9, it was my parents, right? And they somehow kind of either tricked me or supported me into believing that I could achieve this goal that, by the way, when I was 9 years old in it was the 2000s or the late 1990s, kids weren't going and playing Division I basketball, right? There was actually like some years, no athletes, 1 or 2. It wasn't something that Canadian basketball players thought or dreamt of. But sure enough, I had taken my first dive into the deep end, right? And I didn't know it at the time. And I didn't know how traumatizing and painful and amazing that journey over the next kind of 10 years was. or would be. But ultimately, this really carved out the narrative of my life, because two things happened, right? Two things that are important to this discussion tonight. The first one was that at some point along this journey, I realized that despite me wanting to be the best physical athlete in the world in any of the sports I've competed in, I'm just not, right? I'm just not the number, like the 0.001% from an athletic perspective, or at least I haven't found the sport where that side lines up as well. And so, this whole journey of peak performance mindset, I've accomplished the things that I have from an athletic perspective, largely due to my ability to over compete and make up so much ground on the mental game. The second thing I realized is that like this journey of going and playing Division I basketball, of which, I accomplished this, right? So my journey kind of started in high school, having a really good, high school career here in Western Canada, going down, playing Division I basketball, captaining our team to national championship tournaments, winning conference championships. But I started to realize that this journey of like going and chasing a goal that scares the heck out of us, and then is really hard, is one of the most fulfilling things that we can do in life if we know how to navigate that path. And that's kind of what started the deep end mindset, right? It was like, how do we make decisions to align our desires and our like kind of most core purpose with the things, the goals, the dreams that really scare us in life. And so on the athletic side of my life, it's kind of been through circa, over 10 years ago now in the CrossFit world, competing at regionals and kind of in, one of the top CrossFit athletes and teams in Western Canada and in Canada. Trained for the Olympics for 4.5 years, was ranked second in Canada and top 100 in the world. Almost broke my hip, lost my family. Some of the challenges of pushing those limits came pretty apparent to me. And now I'm kind of flirting with this idea potentially over the next few years of what it looks like to be an open water ice kind of marathon style swimmer. So that's, I'm kind of out in the periphery somewhere as one of my little insatiable things I'm looking towards. The other thing that just about me, and this is kind of wrapping up my story, is that, my main goal in life right now is not athletic, right? Post Olympics, I kind of realized that I have to make decisions based on kind of what's down deep within me, and things like family and raising my young daughters. And also being a really strong corporate leader is important. And so I also, have a corporate leadership career as an executive in a technology company, trying to build $1 billion business, kind of being that big, hairy, audacious goal. And so, I've taken a lot of these things that we've talked about and applied them into the business world as well. And I know for lots of us in the room, right, we're doing things outside of sport, outside of athletics, probably for most of us. And guess what? We all will be someday, right? This chapter of sport will end and it will evolve. And so one of the things that I care about most is how do you take as much knowledge and learning and growth and skills out of one chapter and apply it to the next, right? So that's a little bit of like what I love in the corporate world, is bringing a little bit of this peak performance mindset to business, right? To that side of life. And so, to kind of shift us into what is this thing called the deep end mindset. And again, this isn't the purpose of this session, but there's a really critical part, which is you have to get here. You have to make it to the deep end. And for most of us, we're probably already there, right? The prerequisites to this is that you're chasing some type of audacious goal that is going to be a stretch, it's going to be hard, and it's going to be over a long period of time. And you're going to kind of live in this space of the deep end and the battle or the war of attrition, which we're going to talk a lot about. But the point here for us is that being in the deep end, trying to be the very best you can and leverage all these peak performance skills, it's only one piece of a bigger puzzle of life, right? And that's why the deep end mindset is important, because you're going to go through this cycle. The more times you can go through it, the better, right? And this is what makes great humans and great lives lived, is to navigate, climbing the high dive, surviving the deep end, pausing, moving back to the comfort zone, reflecting, growing, building your foundation, climbing back up onto the high dive. For today, we are focused on one very specific component of this, right? And the idea is that when you are on your pursuit, when you're, going out and competing towards whatever goal on the athletic side, like you are in it. You are in it every single day, and it is relentless. Some of the athletes that I work with, I mean, it's just worth acknowledging that like some days it is really hard to get up and train and do the little things and recover. And that's because you're living in this space, right? Of like this constant battle of attrition, this war. I want to play a little I want to play a little clip from Steve Jobs, who like does such an amazing, masterful way of describing this. And somebody just let me know if you can hear
People
the
say
audio.
you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing, and it's totally true. And the reason is because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard, and you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, if you're not having fun doing it, and you don't really love it, you're going to give up. And that's what happens to most people, actually. If you really look at the ones that ended up, being successful, unquote, in the eyes of society, and the ones that didn't, oftentimes it's the ones that are successful loved what they did so they could persevere when it got really tough.
Okay, thank you for the audio check. I would recommend going and finding this clip and listening to it again, because I mean, what Steve Jobs, this case obviously in the business world, is saying is that like you've got to start with something that is connected to the deepest core of who you are. And look, for all of us, we're all on different paths of our journey of like knowing what that core passion purpose is. But my recommendation, like kind of as we dive into like the real work of peak performance, is that if you haven't already, spend some time identifying like, what is your goal? What's the big dream? You may not have even shared it with anyone, and that's okay. But why? Why do you care? What is it connected to? And if like this conversation and this topic is interesting and kind of you want to dig in a little bit more, right? This is where next month we're basically going to do a whole deep end mindset workshop where like this is the entire focus of the hour session. For tonight, it's simply that question, right? Like, and this is where if you have your notepad out, just write this down. Right? We know, again, scientifically, that the more you write these things down, the more you affirm them, the more likely you're going to kind of navigate that path and essentially like, have this come to fruition. So what is that audacious goal and why do you care, right? What's the passion? What's the purpose? What's the deepest part of yourself that you're really excited about? There's two more concepts around like why peak performance, why should we care about this specific part of kind of the chapter that we're in, and like some of the ways that we can apply these skills, these three strategies to the battle that we're all in when we're chasing after something that we love. The first one is this concept of attrition, right? And so like I remember when I was playing basketball, I was trying to go down and play, NCAA Division I. And then when I got on the team, I'm competing against another 12 15 best players in the world, and we're all fighting towards this finite top of the pyramid. And so whatever pursuit you're on, whatever competition you're looking at, that is the reality you find yourself in, is that you wake up on day zero, and let's say when I was training for the Olympics, I knew I had 2,200 days left, 2,100 days left, 1,852 days left, and I know that the pack on day one is all pushing towards that and all fired up. The real question, and part of the game that we're playing, is who's still going to be standing on day 1,982 with only half a year to go, 6 months. I wasn't. I lost, right? That was one of the battles of attrition that I lost. I've learned and grown from it, but that's the game we're playing. And part of it is just who can sustain, who can survive. Ultimately, that comes down to the set of tools we have physiologically and emotionally. It doesn't matter physically, right, how primed we are. And that's where you see athletes on their journey. Some don't make it because they simply burn out or, essentially fall off of this battle of attrition. And so this is one concept. This is what we're trying to build resilience around and just help us manage and sustain our effort throughout the journey. The second one, as we kind of crunch that timeline down and we get closer and closer to the day of the event, the day of the competition. And, I was sharing this weekend with a few of you that are in the room, I think, on the CrossFit side, getting ready for some of these big events. There's just only so much you can do with days to the game time or, weeks to go. You just can't acquire that much physical skill, especially relative to all the people that you're training with. Right? Though that's where you need really broad time horizons. And everyone is already doing that work. The reason why this line gets really exciting for me is that the unlocks the potential that you can capitalize on from a mental and a performance kind of mindset preparation perspective is not only significant because you're not wearing down your body, you're not having to think about, your tapering cycles and things like that, but also because no one else is doing this. So the impact that you have actually becomes really significant. And so this is another part of it, right? Is how do we, as our game day comes up, how do we deploy every, tactic and skill that will help us just glide into that performance event and be at our very best, right? Be in that flow state, make it feel effortless. That's the other side of the work tonight and the importance of it. So I'm just going to pause there for a second. If there's any questions so far, feel free to drop them in, because you may have questions or curiosities or things like that. Just add a quick question to the chat, the Q&A, or to the chat. And this is really, this is it. This is not rocket science, and I'm going to share a little bit of that in more detail in a second. But these are the small things that not very many athletes are doing, right? And this is truly what I think distinguishes, the exceptional from world class, right? It's like that 0.5% at the next level. For tonight, we're talking about 3 pretty simple concepts, right? Having a plan, an execution plan. What does it look like to build that? Why is that important? Managing your energy, right? What does that even mean? What does it look like? Again, why is it important? And then how do you ramp? How do you ramp up for performance? And I actually believe that these things also are almost like linear. It's more important to focus on the bigger building blocks before jumping to the last one. You'll actually undermine yourself if you just are going and trying to do all the things on the game day, on the day of performance to get there. So start with the plan, then build rituals to manage your energy, and then we'll talk about priming for performance. The last thing that I'll share, right, and this is where almost all of us will fall off the map. This is where I see almost every athlete, every leader really have a hard time, is that this is not about volume. It's not about doing everything. It's not about all the biggest life hacks and biohacks and the things that we've seen and heard. This is about doing extremely simple, small things religiously or relentlessly consistent every single day without missing a day. And that's, I guess, where it becomes really hard, right? And part of what I want to share, just as a bit of a paradigm shift maybe for us, is I think maybe why this is harder for us to really grasp is also because, as humans, we just don't do a very good job of this idea of future compounded or exponential growth, right? Our minds have a hard time processing, what looks linear right now every day, doing my gratitude, doing my journaling, writing out my peak performance narrative, meditating, visualizing. How does that result in disproportionate life-changing, peak performance events in the future? And so I remember being introduced to this a long time ago, and the simple question, right? If you were to take a plain 8x11 piece of paper and you folded it on itself 42 times, the question is, how long would it be? How far would it reach? And you can imagine those first few folds are all very it's like millimeters, maybe a centimeter or two. 42 times is not that much, right? Think about doing something for 42 days. Anybody can do that. It's totally achievable. Well, if you could physically do this to a simple piece of paper, you would have a structure that would literally touch the moon. That distance would be over 300,000 kilometers. And this is because over time, all of those little building blocks, those folds on themselves, the consistency of that ultimately end up being something that we couldn't even fathom when we started folding that little piece of paper. And so it's not a direct comparison, but I think it's helpful for us to say, these little things, they will add up and they will disproportionately have an impact on where you end up, 30, 60, 90 days, a year, 5 years, 10 years down the road. That's kind of my why, right? I really believe that starting with 30 days is the right point. And even that for all of us will be an extremely hard challenge. And for any of you, I'll say this at the end, if any of you are up for that challenge, right, of committing to a ritual, committing to this peak performance plan for 30 days, I definitely want to know about it, because those are the journeys that I love supporting. So let's dive in a little bit deeper and talk about, okay, what is this planning thing, right? Why is it important? And the way that I'm going to walk through each of these sections is just with 3 pretty simple slides, right? Why is this important? What could it look like? And how could you practically accomplish it, right? So nothing fancy there. This quote is, I love it because it just is as much as everyone glamorizes that moment of competition, it is in the unglorious or the unspectacular period of preparation that for some, Olympics are happening right now, some athletes takes years, if not decades. The question is, how do we make the most effective use of that time? And for me, there's a couple of really key, important parts of this. And one of the things I actually just added this week is this concept of compartmentalization, right? If you listen to amazing athletes or business leaders, like the world class, if they don't flat out say compartmentalization, you will hear them describing it. And the idea is that part of them having a plan and being proactively prepared, along with a bunch of other energy management tactics, is so that they can compartmentalize the aspects and areas of their lives so that the energy that they're spending, that they're dedicating to those really important pieces, whether it's business, family, sport, life, those almost stay contained in that respective area, and they don't start like bleeding across and over, right? Essentially, what ends up happening is if you don't have this, this skill or this muscle of being able to compartmentalize, you are potentially like sabotaging your energy, your focus, your attention, because you're getting, you know, the peripherals of your life are kind of seeping in to your mindset. And we've all felt this, right? Like where you're at dinner, but you're really thinking somewhere else, right? That's the lack of compartmentalization. I think planning just gives us one tool to help us more explicitly draw some of those lines. Again, you know, like being prepared, controlling the controllables, I think is the starting point here. The idea that like life is always going to throw us curveballs, but at the very least, we can be in control and we can be prepared for what we know is going to happen. And these things are so simple, right? But the idea that like every week or every day, I know the events that I need to navigate around and I need to be ready for, if nothing else, this will provide me with the resilience and the capacity to better handle the curveballs, right? And again, this is something that we talked about this weekend. The third thing is like, be proactive about your execution plan every day, right? Where do you need to be at your best? Where do you actually need to be recovering at 100%? Which, yes, that is a thing. You can recover as hard and as seriously as you play or as you compete. And then finally, this is kind of my favorite, right? There's a swagger to having a plan, meaning like when life is going crazy for other people and you just have this steadfast plan, even if there is that volatility, you know, you get this very subtle confidence, right? You get this little bit of grit that says, I know I can do this. I've got it. It's going to be hard. It's going to be intense. It might be stressful, but I've got my plan. The comparison to this, and I want to share a quick story, because when I was early on in my discus career, right, part of what I had to do while my daughters were being born, like literally sometimes the same week, the day after my second daughter was born, in the springtime, I'd have to travel down to the US, right, and go to all of these kind of world or national level competitions. And one of the first times I went down there, I remember I was so underprepared. I was so naive to the impact that this would have. You know, I showed up, I like flew down. I think this was at the University of Arizona, right? Some of the best track and field athletes in the world down there, discus throwers. I didn't have a track bag to carry my stuff from, you know, my hotel to the venue. I also didn't bring down my own implements because, you know, I didn't have any, I couldn't afford them. I had to, you know, I was like working and didn't have the money to buy like top of the line implements at that point. And so I had to like try and borrow and like kind of like haggle people for their discuses in the warm-up. Ultimately, I ended up going into that discus event being so frazzled by having to run down the street to get like a shopping bag so I could carry my shoes and then like beg people in line, like how embarrassed I was. And before I even entered the ring, my competition was over. And it was, and in hindsight, right, this is the learning, the reflection, was it was totally on me for having a lack of that plan, the execution plan. And that's how quickly it can happen, right? When you get into that fight or flight environment. And so there's a couple of ways that I want to just kind of give you tools to give you to think about, like, okay, what does this mean on the macro scale, the big scale, and then the really granular scale. The first one is when you're thinking about that really big goal, right? For some of us, if we're trying to go to the CrossFit Games or the Olympics or, you know, the run an Ironman, et cetera, those goals can sometimes be a couple of years out, if not longer. And so you actually want to have a long journey that just calls out the big milestones, right? Like I knew the distances that I had to throw, the events that I had to qualify for on my kind of 5-year, 6-year Olympic trajectory. And then on this quarterly basis, which is like every 3 months, that allows you to zoom in a little bit more and basically say like, okay, for this next block, what do I need to do? Like what's in there? And then as we zoom into the now, right, every day and every week, I really believe that there's an opportunity to like write out your plan. Like I have a daily planner here that I have like my days and my weeks, and it's really just your plan of attack, building that proactive plan. And I go into a little bit more detail here. I actually love, there was something that came up that I want to show on the screen in a second. So here, like if we look at this, right, annual and quarterly planning, what are the main big stages, the milestones? I like this idea of what's the theme of the journey that you're in right now. So like for me, this year as a theme is wheelhouse. Like that's kind of the phase of life that I'm in some of the different areas. And then if you're really going for it, right, and you've got like that audacious goal, I would recommend thinking about what's an artifact, what's something that you can have that identifies the journey, the pursuit that you're on, and maybe like what's going to happen at the end. And I saw this on the news just a couple of days ago, right? So this women's Canadian speed skating team, and you know, they basically had this like written out golden ticket. Maybe some of you saw this. This is an artifact. This represents, it's a vision of where we're going. It's worth thinking about, like, what are those things that you can kind of hold on to? For me, I would write Div 1 on my hand every single day. Probably not a good kind of ink consumption. I would also have like a banner right on my bedroom wall when I was growing up, and I'd touch it every day, right? That was something that I learned from some of the basketball players before me, of like that artifact, right? That ritual of affirming your larger goals. And then on the weekly and daily perspective, right, I don't want to spend too much time on these, but it's really about like going into that next level, right? Like what are the key events during the week? When do you need to be at your best? There might be a workout, there might be a training session where you really want to prime, even if it's just practice, right? Again, you know where those are, so plan for them. What are the big obstacles? What are the potential risks that could blindside you? And then what does life look like, right? I think that's sometimes that maybe we don't consider, is like, what are all the other things that are going on outside of sport that I really need to be mindful and cognizant of so that they don't encroach and I can manage those appropriately. And then daily is the same thing, right? It's like, what is that intention for the day? What are my key blocks of time? Where am I peaking and where am I recovering? So again, not rocket science, but if you do this for 30 days, right, I would be really curious to get your feedback of what you learned and how you felt like, you know, you potentially shift from a little bit more of a reactive mode to proactive. Again, we're talking about like a less than 5-minute commitment per day, just from a scope perspective. So you've got your plan, we've got that foundation. The next thing is, okay, how do you give yourself the best chance every day to have as much energy as possible and the ownership, the focus of that energy to put it towards the things that you care about? That's really the step 2, right? Managing your energy. And there is absolutely a way to do this and a way that, you know, not to do it. And there's cost and you know, consequences to that. So, you know, simple quote here, right? Like what exists in your future is a result of exactly what you're doing right now and how you're choosing to show up intentionally every day. I had this incredible, you know, sports psychologist work with me out of Italy several years ago. And what he described it was like you have these units of attention, right? So all of us every day, we have these units of attention, and, you know, it takes energy to devote and like put those into different things. But for most of us, there's a lot of this energy that is just kind of ending up fizzling out, right? It gets sucked out of all of these different holes that we're not really thinking about, that aren't intentional. And that this is the work, right? The work is to be able to more proactively own and have like that ownership over our attention, over our energy, so that we can focus it on the things that we really care about. Ultimately, this is a bit of that battle of attrition, right? Every one of us is waking up each morning with a finite amount of energy. It is not limitless. It does not just, you know, replace itself over and over again. It is a resource, and it is a depletable resource on a daily basis. The macro theme, right, that a lot of us are living through, either as athletes, individuals, parents, is that the world is increasingly benefiting, profiting, right? The social media kind of the era of one of our kind of cancers, right, that we're going to be experiencing is it is their job to rewire your brain to not be able to focus. Every time you pick up your phone or it buzzes, we all probably know this at this point, but you get this neurological dopamine rush. That not only trains your brain to like want more of that thing, meaning like your device and your social, it also rewires your brain to not be able to focus or apply that energy and attention anywhere else in your life, right? So there's this insidious byproduct of us not knowing what's happening, right? And I think that's, again, a little bit more of a conversation, not for today necessarily, but like that's something we really need to pay attention to. And I know as parents, like my wife and I are always talking and thinking about that as well. So again, small habits, like this is not rocket science. And this is where we're going to get really surgical and like really practical in terms of what you could do literally starting tonight when we get off the call. I just wrote this as like a thought when I was going through this, is the athletes who can consistently deploy the most energy, attention, and focus to their pursuit over time, right, multiplied by time, will reap the greatest intangible and exponential benefits down the road. One note, because what's happening underneath all of this, we're talking about energy, but what's directly connected this and outside of our view is our nervous system. And so I actually wanted to take a slide, and it's almost like a little bit of a pause, and talk about like, what is our nervous system and why does it matter, especially as athletes? So, you know, starting with the basics, you know, we have the two sides of our nervous system, central nervous system, our sympathetic nervous system, our parasympathetic, right? Sympathetic is fight or flight. It's our stress response. It's triggered by this really old part of our brain called the amygdala and kind of our lizard brain. And it can hijack our body. It can take over absolutely everything. And it's really costly from an energy perspective. And sometimes, whether we're, you know, running from the proverbial, I mean, it shouldn't be the real saber-toothed tiger, right? That's why this part of our brain exists. Or we know how to leverage our sympathetic nervous system for performance, you know, to be at our primed best with the most energy output is really valuable. But all of the other time, it generally doesn't serve us very well. Parasympathetic is just this recovery state, right? Rest, digest, recover. And so, you know, this is largely controlled subconsciously or unconsciously. A little bit of what we're going to talk about today is ways, just like we did at the very beginning, right? Taking that pause, ways that we can actually move from sympathetic to parasympathetic, right? From stress, anxiety, worries, doubt, that performance anxiety to calm, relaxed, focused. And guess what, right? The breath is the one conscious vehicle that we have, because the vagal nerve, right? And that's why we have this like vagus nerve here. It basically starts at your brainstem and it runs all the way down through your body. And it's kind of like the vehicle. They call it like the brake of the nervous system, like the car brake. And so a little bit of this is, how do we control our nervous system as consciously as possible, so that especially if we like get down some of those dark, you know, rabbit holes of stress and anxiety and things like that, we have tools to help find our way out, right? And this all has to do with what's going on in those feelings, those emotions, right? The chemicals that are being dumped into our bodies that we a lot of times don't have control over. And so what does this look like? Now, with a little bit of that foundation, those placeholders, these are just pretty simple topics, right? So the first thing is, you've got to own your energy. You need to actually have ownership over it. It can't just be like being lost in all of these different unconscious things, like, you know, cell phones and not really paying attention, and mental time travel, right? Worrying about the future, regretting the past. The second thing is, like, we can do a lot of really simple things to gain perspective. A lot of times as athletes, we like zero in on that performance that's coming up, and that can be quite detrimental from like a worry perspective. There's a lot of ways that you can just get perspective. And for those of us who have been through a few of these chapters, you know, like, sport can feel like it's the most important thing, but it rarely is in the big picture of life. But it's helpful to have some tools to like get out of that headspace. Those unconscious habits, right? How many times are you picking up your phone? How often are you getting lost down some of those tracks? I kind of over index on the technology and the device and the social media side, just because I don't think there's been enough conversation around how, you know, detrimental this is to an energy management and a focus perspective. And then the last one is recovery, right? Like, we actually, as a part of depleting your energy, is like, how do you restore it? And you need to be doing that like every minute of every hour of every day of every week, right? There's like little applications of recovery. And that's why we call them recovery windows. And you need to have a whole bunch of different ways that you can deploy those as you're going through your day of like high output training session, 15-minute nap, going back and like watching film, and then going for a walk outside, clearing your head, that kind of thing. And of course, right, I think one of the biggest opportunities for athletes is actually to like place a little bit more stock in rest, recovery, pause, reflection, just because we're so over indexed, we're over invested on like the grind, the hustle, the doing all the work, the, overworking. And that ultimately kind of leads not only down a pretty negative path in terms of injury and burnout and such, but it also values the opportunity for us to rest, right, and have a really big impact on the rest and recovery side. So what could this practically look like? And for me, this comes in the form of daily rituals. Again, these are things that we can all do. So, and these on the screen are things that are like hands down now scientifically proven. If you do them, you will be physiologically stronger. You'll be able to manage your emotion. You'll have more resilience. All of these things, right? There are so many benefits. And it just so happens that peak performance is a byproduct of all of those. Simplicity over complexity, right? Consistency over volume. Meditation, 5 minutes a day. Gratitude, right? Every day, write down your three things you're grateful for. Get out in nature. I have that on the visual there. And then one thing that I've like absolutely loved personally, and I have, my own beliefs around the value that I think cold has. This is obviously everyone's own, journey and at your discretion, and that you're, making sure that you're healthy for it. But even I believe that cold gives us the ability to trigger our central nervous system, our sympathetic nervous system. That is the exact trigger that we want to actually get a little bit more conscious about. And so what I've found is that whether it's, cold showers every day, or doing cold dips, or obviously now ice swimming in 4-degree water for 30 minutes, it gives us the ability to use our breath consciously to down regulate our sympathetic nervous system. So like, if you try this, you'll notice it. And we all know this, right? You go into cold water and boom, you're in that like, right? So everything's stopped, you're tensed up, all your blood is actually starting to move into your core, right? You're in full sympathetic mode, fight or flight. And you can actually use your breath to like calm yourself down. And just that process is a muscle and a skill that you can then take out of the cold exposure, as one vehicle, and apply it to the moments before you step on stage, right? So that you can take it and transfer it to where it will also be valuable in helping down regulate some of those really intense, heavy stress responses. And then finally, this idea of like the recovery windows, right? And so the reason why I had this visual on the side, this is kind of from me several years ago now, but there are things that are days and weeks in time duration, and there are things that are minutes, right? And hours. And the idea is that like throughout the course of the day, you probably want to have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things that you can go and do that will help you recover, right? And they don't have to be complex. What helps you relax? What feels like it's filling you up with energy? What helps you recover physically? Again, things like nature, social interaction, like we know those things just physiologically are beneficial to us. And again, you want to have them across a whole bunch of different time durations just so that they're accessible, right? This quiver, this idea that like I can pull it out of, the back like a quiver of arrows. What is in your recovery quiver? And then finally, step 3, this was me doing an edit like a minute and a half before we went live. That should say step 3. Once we've got kind of these longer tail foundational pieces in place, our planning process, our energy management every day to sustain the journey, now we get to transition into the final chapter, which is like the ramp up to peak performance, right? The game day, the event. I love watching athletes steel themselves. It's the moment before. I've got a little short video clip that I'm going to show in a minute. It is like the most beautiful realization of all of that work in this look in their eyes that I am ready and I am like in the zone and I'm in my flow and it's time to go. That is what this whole third step is about. There's my step 3. And so, the simple things here are there's an equation to this, right? Like there is an equation to obtaining and managing getting into flow states, right? Or in the zone, right? That's kind of these states of highest peak performance where we're kind of at our very best. There's ways to leverage what we know about neuroscience and how our brains work, this idea that neurons that fire together wire together, right? When you're practicing a skill, the more you practice it, the more your brain is making those connections. It just so turns out that we now know that if you practice it well enough using your mind's eye visually, right, visualizing, those neurons still connect and strengthen their connections. And then finally, I actually think that, like, you know, this is something that I've learned over the longer tail of my peak performance, you know, in athletic journeys, is that, like, our central nervous system, the system that kind of drives us, it needs priming, it needs ramping up. And I actually think for all of us, that looks a little bit different. I'm going to speak to that in just a second. But there's like this weird, it's a feeling for me, right? I know what my central nervous system feels like when I'm at that like brink of being at the absolute like pinnacle of performance and going out onto the stage. I also know what it feels like to be totally down and in a slump after that huge event. And like those feel like very different things. We need to know what that feels like and how to get kind of in and out of those zones. So what are some of the things that you can use here? So the first one is this idea of like writing your perfect story, right? What is the, because now remember, we're talking about the performance. We're talking about that one event. This is what essentially that means is like, you're not that far out. You're maybe days, maybe weeks, maybe months, if it's like, you know, a world-class, a major event. And you're really writing, and sorry, for Olympic and world-class athletes, it absolutely is months. There are people who are doing this years out, writing their narrative, writing that perfect event, visualizing it every single day. The first thing is just to write it out, right? Like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What is the experience that you're going through like when it happens perfectly? The idea is that you can then take that narrative that you own and it is intrinsically important to you, and you can start visualizing it. You can start making those neural connections in your brain without it ever having happened yet, right? So you can start to see how these things connect together before we actually step foot on, you know, the playing surface or the field. And then I think that, you know, the best athletes, and like we'll watch this in just a second, they take all the guesswork out of their preparation. And I mean like their preparation leading up to the moment of flow, the moment of performance. So whatever your dry run, your preparation plan, as you like get into the facility, you get your equipment set up, you're getting ready for the game, you should A, know exactly what that plan is. B, if you're an individual athlete and it's an individual event, my recommendation is practice that over and over again. The idea here is that you don't want to spend any energy, any thought, any stress on the moments, the small moments leading up to, you know, being on stage, being on for your performance. And this allows you, again, you remember that concept of like rolling subtle confidence, right? This is the final extension of that. You're in the zone. You just want everything to kind of roll right into the event. You don't want to be blindsided by rushing around, having a plastic garbage bag with your discus shoes. Won't do that again. And then finally, I want to show a couple of videos of like, what does it mean, this like central nervous system sweet spot, that the CNS, right? The central nervous system. I think for me, I've had to kind of learn, like, I'm not one of the guys that like screams and yells. Like that actually doesn't do anything for me. It actually like undermines my ability to focus and stay calm and like a little bit more parasympathetic. But everyone's a little bit different, and knowing what that is for you is really important. So I want to show just two quick examples. The first one, you know, one of the best killer instinct athletes in the world.
It's a good separation for me, you know, emotionally, to be able to put myself in a place where at practice or when I'm training or during games, I switch my mind to something else. I switch my mode into something else, right? For me, it's the equivalent of Maximus Decimus Meridius in Gladiator picking up the dirt, smelling the dirt. It's go time. Right? So that was my mental switch. It was like an actor getting ready for a film. You got to put yourself in that cage. When you're in that cage, you are that character. And then when you leave there, it's something completely different. But when I'm in that cage, bro, don't fucking touch me. Don't talk to me. Just leave me alone.
That feel, right? Like, I love that, you know, like that is the moment, the switch. And for Kobe goes on to talk about how he, like, for the biggest games, he listened to the Halloween theme song, and that was like what just got him into that mode, that zone. Again, for everyone, it's a little bit different. He kind of, you know, has a laugh about it, but like that's the reality, right? That's like the depth of intensity to like the devotion of us. And that's why that's why the Jason mask is there. It's a little bit creepy. That's what it takes. And so this next clip, I want you to see what it looks like. And it's just going to be a few seconds, but just like watch the intensity in this Olympic weightlifter's eyes as they step onto the mat. Staring at the barbell. And this is that controlled aggression. Right, that focus, that stare, that intensity, that's that moment of stealing. It's something that we all have as well, right? We all have this, and it's a beautiful feeling, albeit it's intense, right? You feel it in every part of your body. It's not a mistake, right? It takes work to get here. It takes this priming event. So, just wanted to show you visually, and I'll continue to find, more clips like that. But I think they're really powerful in terms of like the visceral emotion you feel just watching that is quite powerful, because it is almost like that altered state. And so, just quickly wrapping up this section is, how, well, in the weeks leading up to your event, feel free to try this, right? Write down your story, kind of review it every day, maybe make notes or make changes. What you'll find is that there will be little nuggets of the story that will start coming into your conscious, and you'll want to actually include them, right? Capture them in the narrative. Make that as visceral as possible, because we know with visualization, I'm going to show a clip of what real visualization looks like in a second. This has an impact, and it doesn't take that physical toll on your body. You can like do it as a complement to what you're doing in practice and preparation. And then finally, just executing those dry runs perfectly, right? So like really take those seriously. And I think if you do all these things, even in the week leading up, I'd love, again, feedback. Did it make a difference? Did you feel better, calmer, more prepared going into the moment of the event? Because if you did, there's absolutely a higher likelihood that you will show up and you'll be able to cruise. You'll basically be able to move into that flow state more effortlessly. And so I love this video. This is Adam Andre. He's one of the best climbers in the world. And he's doing this thing called flash climbing, which is like, my brother who's a climber would do a better description of this. But basically, you've never laid your hands on the mountain and you have to climb the whole, essentially the whole ascent in one go, right? So he's going up to like one of the hardest ascents in the world for not even regular climbers, but elite climbers, and he's gonna flash climb it. This video is all about like, how do you prepare to do that, to absolutely go into the unknown? So just watch a little bit of.
I was quite nervous, but I just tried to focus on my own process.
Watch the intensity.
I visualized it so many times. I was patient, waiting for the perfect moment when I turn all this fear and pressure into a complete flow of my mind.
Right. So I even love the fact that in that narrative, you hear that, like he's saying, I have all this potential stored up, and it's a combination of fear and like work and visualization, and I'm waiting to unleash it. The intensity of visualization, like it gives me goosebumps. That's what real visualization looks like. And look, like it may look silly, it may feel silly, but for those of us who like truly want to be competing and playing and going out on the business side in life at our best, like why not try it? Why not see if that has an impact? I'll give my last why on that in a couple of minutes. But this essentially is like, again, it's not a crazy toolkit in terms of priming for your performance event. And with that, I actually want to, transition us into saying, okay, you've done all these things. Maybe you've done them in this like 30-day capacity. I want to at least touch on this, right? The fact that like when your journey to whatever that end destination, that audacious goal is, when it's over, it's important to stop, right? We've got all these little recovery windows that are small, and they are equally important, but they're more bite-sized in nature. When it's all over, you have to take the pause, especially if you're going on a journey that is a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years long. As athletes, we know that the growth and the strength, the development of our bodies and our, like, you know, our fitness, does not come when we're actually in the gym doing the workout, pushing our bodies to the limits, right? When does it come? It comes when we pause, when we recover, when we sleep, when we're basically giving our body everything it needs to grow. It's not that much different with our minds and our, you know, our psyche, our emotions. We need that time to unpack this crazy, intense experience in the deep end, in the battle of attrition every day. Our brains aren't focused on pulling out all of the learnings and what did I learn about myself and like what am I going to apply to my foundations and my core. That doesn't happen when you're in the deep end. It doesn't happen when you're battling every day. All that data, right, gets dumped into our subconscious, and so we actually need this time. This is where we grow as humans. You know, one of the reasons why I kind of gave the case to go down this path of peak performance, take it seriously, is because if you do it, I can almost guarantee there'll be a point where you absolutely shock yourself. I remember like I went to the 2016 Olympic trials, the Rio trials. I'd been throwing for a year at that point. I was totally under-equipped in the field, wasn't going to qualify for those Olympics from a distance perspective. And I was scared out of my mind because I was around all these giants. I was a total imposter. And I struggle with the imposter syndrome, as I know there's definitely other people here that do. I've never applied this practice. You know, this is a little bit after that Arizona experience. I've never applied this to the same degree that I did then, and, you know, ended up walking away on the podium, right, at Olympic trials, coming third, throwing a 3-meter personal best. And it all was related to this peak performance process. And those are important, right? Those moments of surprise, of amazement are critical. And we actually want to stop and acknowledge those, right? What were the things that got us there? And how could we build that into our foundation and now reach for something even higher, right? The next high dive we climb up is going to be bigger. That's why we do it. And so, you know, in closing, my last couple of like thoughts to prepare you all with, and hopefully to just start the conversation, right? Because that's the other side of all of this, you know, for everyone here is, for me, this is not meant to be a, like, this solves everything. This is the beginning of a journey and hopefully the beginning of a conversation that we all get to have together. I am here to support athletes, leaders, humans like all of you. I'm, you know, almost always only a message or a text or a call away. This is the playbook that some of you can potentially take and apply directly. So the first thing is like starting with that deep end, right? What high dive are you jumping off and why the heck do you care? Do you think you'll survive, right? Like, or is Steve Jobs calling your bluff and saying, you know, you don't really love it, and 2 years from now, when life sucks and you had to sacrifice everything, I know you're going to quit, and that's why I'm going to win. You need to be that person. You need to do that work before you even take the jump. That's belief. The roadmap, right? What is the big picture? What's the theme? What's the narrative? What's your artifact that you're going to take along on your journey that only you and your close core group of supporters know, right? That golden ticket that the speed skating team was holding around until they cashed it in. That's your big picture roadmap. Your plan is being intentional and focused every day and every week. It's 5 minutes a day. That's all it'll take you, and 5 minutes on the weekend. And it is totally worth it. Take those 5 minutes and add on another 5 minutes, and you'll have your meditation and your gratitude, and you'll basically have an energy management protocol all packaged up in one. When you're getting ready for your event, grab 5 more minutes, or up to like 15 to 20 minutes at this point, throw on some visualization, write down your performance narrative, and you now are going to be moving into that main event, right? And you're going to have all the tools to be able to show up on the game day. And like, my vision for this has always been, I want to show up, I want to be super nervous, but I want to be calm, and I want to have a little grin on my face, right? Because I'm ready. That's the goal of all of this. And then finally, don't sleep on the pause. Don't just rush into the next thing, right? Take the time, give yourself permission. In the long run, it'll be worth it. And this is even like competition to competition. Take some time to reflect, to recover, to really unpack the journey. Here's the question, right? For those of you that are going on or are on some journey, can you afford 30 days, right? If you're going towards some big goal, can you give yourself 30 days to apply this and see for yourself? right? In the big picture of things, will this be a worthwhile investment of 15 to 20 minutes a day? That's where for me, it's like, okay, I think this is applicable for everyone. Almost nobody will do it. I mean, that's the candid reality. And it's not just everyone in this room or watching this. The reality is that we just aren't willing to put enough focus and intention. And also a lot of us don't have the structure to do this. But I would love to be alongside you and kind of walk alongside you if you are going to apply this for 30 days and kind of be to support and answer questions and all of that. And with that, I want to say a huge thank you. The last 2 minutes here, the first one is that at some point, probably tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to send out an email. It's going to have this recording. It's also going to have basically like your planning workbook, right? So it's not a long thing, but it's something that you can use to basically go through all of this. You'll also have that slide, which is like your playbook. I would love your feedback. And even more than that, to be perfectly honest with you, like, because this work is like, I do it in the wee hours of the morning, like 3 and 4 a.m. some days, and then in the evenings. I want this to get out to the people who need it, right? So if you know one athlete or one team that would benefit from any part of this, I'm going to run this session again in April. It'll be improved and have new content, but largely peak performance for athletes. The other thing that I'm super excited for is to start getting back in person and doing these workshops live with individual groups of athletes as well as teams. So that invitation is open for anyone who may have a group that this type of work in a more facilitated live environment would be really valuable and helpful. And so with that, I can see there's actually been a number of people who have jumped on in and out, and even some that are just coming on right now. I'm going to pause there. If there are any questions at this point, feel free to put them in the chat. For those of you who may have jumped on, even in the last few minutes, I know everyone's kind of running in and life is happening. You will get the full recording. And with that, I'll kind of hang around for a couple of minutes. If there's questions, we'll kind of dive into those. So this is the quote unquote after hours. But for anyone who needs to sign off, I just want to say a final thank you. I'm really looking forward and deeply appreciate your feedback on this session. What resonated? What would you love more of? What would you love less of? And with that, I'll say a good night to everyone. I'll stay on for about 1 more minute for questions, but otherwise, I appreciate all of you and I'm wishing you all the very best. Yeah, one quick question is anyone who does want to donate, I'll take that offline and I'll definitely help. It might just be easiest to sign up for the April webinar and add the donation there, and then forward that to a friend. So your friend can come to the workshop or the webinar. You can go in through that donations page. I just every month send those to one of those 3 organizations that support youth development, youth leadership, and Indigenous leadership programs. So yeah, really appreciate that. I know Eventbrite isn't super intuitive on that side. So yeah, that great question. Really appreciate that. Any final questions? Feel free, again, use the Q&A or just write it right into the chat. And of course, you all know where to find me. I'll leave the webinar running for about a minute or so, but it looks like folks are starting to sign off, which is great. Go enjoy the rest of your evening. And if there aren't any final questions, going once, twice, we will sign off for the night. Looking forward to connecting with all of you offline. Take care, everyone. Have a great evening.